Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines. In Afghanistan, the government says the Taliban have killed 28 policemen in a series of attacks on security checkposts in the southern part of the country. Local officials say the Taliban shot dead a number of security personnel even after they surrendered in the southern province of Uruzgan. The group claimed responsibility for the attacks in several provinces but denied killing unarmed policemen. The latest spike in violence comes as the warring sides are engaged in peace talks in Doha. Indian occupation troops have martyred another civilian in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youth was killed during a military crackdown in the Tral area of the Pulwama district. Over 300 Kashmiris have been killed by Indian troops since New Delhi revoked the Indus Special status in August last year. In the United States, 2 police officers have been shot injured during protests against a grand jury's decision over the killing of Breonna Taylor in Louisville. Earlier, the jury decided 3 officers involved in the killing of the 26-year-old black lady will not be directly charged for her death. Taylor was shot multiple times during a police raid at her apartment on the 13th of March. South Korea says North Korean troops have killed and burned one of its officials. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said the man had disappeared from a patrol boat near the border and was later found in the North's waters. The ministry condemned the killing and urged Pyongyang to punish those involved in the outrageous act. The coronavirus outbreak continues to overwhelm India as another 1,129 people have died in the past 24 hours, while over 86,000 have been infected with the positive. The country's death toll has crossed 91,000 mark with over 5.7 million infections. In Pakistan, 5 people have lost their lives overnight, taking the toll to 6,437. Globally, the virus has claimed over 975,000 lives while infecting more than 31.7 million people. News coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail and start from Afghanistan, where the government says the Taliban have killed 28 policemen in a series of attacks on security checkposts in the southern part of the country. Local officials say the Taliban shot dead a number of security personnel even after they surrendered in the southern province of Uruzgan. The group claimed responsibility for the attacks in several provinces but denied killing unarmed policemen. The latest spike in violence comes as the warring sides are engaged in peace talks in Doha aimed at ending the decades-long war. The agreement is expected to pave the way for the withdrawal of all foreign troops from Afghanistan. Meanwhile, Indian occupation troops have martyred another civilian in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The Indian troops martyred the youth during a military crackdown in the Tral area of the Pulwama district. The occupation forces have also arrested a civilian in the same area. Over 300 Kashmiris have been killed by Indian troops since New Delhi revoked the Indus Special status in August last year. The occupied valley has been reeling under an inhumane curfew and communications blackout since then. Now, Pakistan says India has continued its onslaught of brutalities in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Addressing the United Nations Human Rights Council, Deputy Permanent Representative Tahir Andrabi said the world must take notice of Indian atrocities in the occupied valley. He said Indian government is committing violence against indigenous Kashmiri human rights defenders and journalists. Andrabi said Indian forces are employing torture and arbitrary detentions against journalists under its draconian laws. The diplomat said India's human rights violations are designed to muzzle reporting on demographic changes in the occupied valley. Indian troops have killed more than 300 Kashmiris since it revoked the special status of Kashmir last year. Now, Russia claims militants are planning a massive chemical attack in Syria's city of Idlib to accuse the central government. In a statement, the Russian Center for Reconciliations in Syria said toxic agents have already been shipped into Libya. Now, the center said militants are preparing to make stage videos to pin blame on the Syrian government. It said the chemical weapons will be used against the civilians' population. Meanwhile, Syria's state media said militants have prepared 2 tons of toxic agents and are keeping it in an inhabited locality in the southwest of Idlib. It said that Syria condemns such heinous crimes and calls on countries supporting terrorists to stop those tricks that target civilians. It added Syria will hold the United States, France, Germany, Netherlands and Turkey responsible for killing innocent people without any moral deterrent. Moving on, France says international parties must ramp up pressure on Lebanese political forces to form a government. In a speech, Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian said the political forces have still not managed to agree on forming a government. He said strong and convergent pressures are pivotal to push the Lebanese officials to respect their commitments. Le Drian said there will be no international financial aid without the reforms. Meanwhile, the International Support Group for Lebanon also called on the country's leaders to get united and form a government. Meanwhile, Iraqi President Barham Saleh has called on international leaders to unite in the fight against corruption and terrorism. Saleh made the comments in a pre-recorded speech played at the United Nations General Assembly. Saleh said terrorism cannot completely be eradicated if its financing is not dried up. He said among the tasks which the new government must discharge is holding of early elections next year. Saleh said these elections should be free and transparent within the framework of a new electoral law. The Iraqi president also called on the UN to tackle horrific crimes against the Yazidi people.
We must tackle the crimes of genocide and of the massacres of the Yazidi people in Iraq. These acts aimed to exterminate the Yazidi people. For this reason, the international community must stand shoulder to shoulder with Iraq to ensure that such crimes can never be committed again.
Moving on, Israeli officials have visited Bahrain to discuss areas of cooperation between the two countries. Earlier this month, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates signed agreements to establish formal ties with Israel. A Bahraini government spokesperson confirmed the visit of Israeli officials without giving further details. This comes after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a conversation with Bahrain's Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa. In a tweet, Netanyahu said the two sides discussed the principles of the Abraham Accords in a telephone call. Now, in the United States, 2 police officers have been shot injured during protests against a grand jury's decision over the killing of Breonna Taylor in Louisville. Earlier, the jury decided 3 officers involved in the killing of the 26-year-old black lady will not be charged for her death.
A state of emergency has been declared in Louisville, and the National Guard have also been deployed to contain the growing number of protesters. Police say both officers who were shot during a clash with demonstrators are stable and have non-life-threatening injuries. On the 13th of March, Breonna Taylor was shot multiple times during a police raid at her apartment. Her death has become a rallying cry for anti-racism protesters who have called for the 3 officers involved to be arrested and charged. But the jury charged only 1 officer with wanton endangerment for firing into a neighbor's apartment in Louisville. The other 2 officers have not been charged.
Now, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Cyprus and Greece's maximalist claims are behind tensions in the eastern Mediterranean. Erdogan made these comments during a video conference with head of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. He said both Athens and Nicosia are ignoring the rights of Ankara and northern Cyprus. Ankara''s Communications Directorate said the two officials also discussed Turkish-EU ties and regional developments. Erdogan said Ankara is ready for talks with Athens and expressed hope that Greece will not miss this opportunity for dialogue. Earlier, Erdogan discussed the situation in the disputed waters with NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg. In a tweet, Stoltenberg said the two sides discussed ongoing efforts for military de-escalation to conflict to avoid incidents. Moving on, the United States has announced new sanctions related to Cuba, restricting the import of cigars and liquor from the Caribbean country. Speaking at a White House event, President Donald Trump said the Treasury Department will prohibit U.S. travelers from staying at the properties owned by Cuban government. The president said the decision is part of America's continuing fight against communist oppression. Last year, Washington imposed heavy curbs on travel to Cuba, saying the move aimed to pressure Havana over its support for Venezuela. Since taking office in 2017, Trump has sought to unwind a policy of warning of ties with Cuba pursued by his predecessor, President Barack Obama. Now, South Korea says North Korean troops have killed and burned one of its fisheries officials. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said the man had disappeared from a patrol boat near the border and was later found in the North's waters. It condemned the killing and urged Pyongyang to punish those involved in the outrageous act. Earlier, state news agency reported the official disappeared from an inspection boat in waters near the island of Yeonpyeong 3 days ago. Pyongyang has not commented on the incident yet. North Korea has tightened its borders to prevent the coronavirus from entering the country. Meanwhile, NASA has warned the U.S. Congress of China's dominance in space after 2030 if Washington does not boost its presence in the Earth's orbit. NASA Chief Jim Bridenstine said the United States International Space Station will be decommissioned by 2030, leaving an open playing field for Beijing. He said it is critical to maintain U.S. space supremacy in the face of a planned Chinese space station likely to be deployed by 2022. In June, China announced that it is partnering with 23 entities from 17 countries to carry out scientific experiments on the station. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now. Moving on with the news stories. At least 28 people have died in a gas tank explosion in Nigeria's central Kogi state. Authorities say 9 children are among those killed. Police said the crash happened after the brakes failed, making the driver lose control of the tanker. They said the explosion took place opposite a petrol station along a highway in the state. State governor says the accident led to loss of lives and destroyed many vehicles, properties and other valuables. The coronavirus outbreak continues to overwhelm India as another 1,129 have died in the past 24 hours, while over 86,000 people have tested positive. Globally, the virus has claimed over 975,000 lives, while infecting more than 31.7 million people. More details in this report.
As some countries in Asia have succeeded to curb the spread of virus, India struggles with thousands of cases on a daily basis. Country's death toll has crossed 91,000 mark with over 5.7 million infections. Mainland China has reported 7 new cases, down from 10 reported a day earlier. Over in Australia's Victoria state, the number of new daily cases was close to a 3-month low. Boeing hopes that restrictions will be eased sooner than expected.
These numbers are coming down. This strategy is working. We are well on track on Sunday to make some further announcements, and I just wanted to make the point that Sunday will not be a day of massive steps. It will not be. The roadmap does not speak to that. It is not a day when we essentially throw the doors open. It will be, however, steady and safe steps, and that sense of gradual, continual progress.
Brazil has world's third highest number of coronavirus cases, leading vaccine makers to seek out South America's largest country to test their candidates. The country's Sao Paulo state authorities say they're likely to start immunizing their population with China's Sinovac vaccine in mid-December. Over in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warns the country is on the brink of a surge if people did not follow public health guidelines.
In our four biggest provinces, the second wave isn't just starting, it's already underway. The numbers are clear. Back on March 13th, when we went into lockdown, there were 47 new cases of COVID-19. Yesterday alone, we had well over 1,000. We're on the brink of a fall that could be much worse than the spring.
In Europe, like other countries where the infection rate has soared, France has been gradually tightening limits on gatherings to avoid a second national lockdown. Unveiling a map of coronavirus danger zones, Paris has given the hardest-hit local authorities days to tighten restrictions or risk having a state of health emergency declared there.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 5 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says nearly 800 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry said the countrywide death toll stands at 6,437. It said the number of active cases across the country is just over 7,000. The ministry added so far 294,000 people have recovered while 103 patients are on ventilators. Now in Taiwan, conservationists are collecting rare plant species before they are lost to climate change and human encroachment. The environmentalists say they want to ensure Taiwan's biodiversity is protected and can be reintroduced. Details in this report.
Taiwan has a heavily populated, sometimes polluted, western coastal plain. About 70% of the island is covered in a dense mountainous forest, home to deer, wild boar, and a highly threatened population of bears. The government has made environmental protection and shifting to renewable energy a key priority. The plant hunters are scouring subtropical Taiwan from the rugged eastern coast.
I started collecting plants when I was still at school. I didn't used to think it was that important, but since I began working at the Conservation Center, I have realized that many living things that used to be there are no longer there. So for many living things, if you don't conserve them properly, then perhaps in the future you'll no longer be able to find them.
The group members have to clamber up a steep cliff and face other difficulties in the rainy climate of the country to gather plants.
Not everyone can go to the places I go to. I can stay a long time out in the wild, in the mountains or forests. I go in scattered directions. I am very good at climbing trees. Not everyone can climb trees.
Scientists have signed a petition calling for immediate action to address the climate emergency. They have demanded the same amount of attention and resources to counter climate change as had been pledged for the coronavirus pandemic.
Now, the Egyptian archaeologists have discovered a 2,500-year-old stone coffin at the ancient necropolis of Saqqara. Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities said 27 coffins were found at the ancient burial ground that is also home to one of the world's oldest pyramids. In a statement, the ministry said the coffins are ornately painted and covered in hieroglyphs. Saqqara is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In March, Egypt reopened the Djoser's Step Pyramid, the first pyramid ever built after a 14-year restoration costing nearly $6.6 million. Now, stocks in the Asia-Pacific markets have fallen following an overnight drop on Wall Street. South Korean stocks dived as tensions on the Korean peninsula reignited. The Kospi in South Korea dropped more than 2%, but shares of South Korean defense firm Victech soared more than 21%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index fell close to 2%. Mainland Chinese stocks slipped, with the Shanghai Composite and the Shenzhen Component declining over 1.5%. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 and Topix Index shed almost 1%. In Australia, ASX 200 declined over 1%. Overall, the MSCI Asia ex-Japan Index fell over 1.5%. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.